Just in case you're not aware of the background of that reading, this is Good Friday. This is the conversation that Jesus, part of it, that Jesus had with Pontius Pilate right before he was condemned to die. So, Holy Thursday, the Last Supper is done. Jesus has gone to Gethsemane and prayed. He's been arrested. He's been taken, and a bit of a mock trial in front of the Jewish leadership. And then they've taken him to Pilate, and this is part of that conversation. And Pilate's struggling, not unreasonably so, because his trouble is the same challenge that you and I have this morning. We have to understand what it means to be a king. That's the conversation, it seems. Pilate's got an idea of king, and Jesus has got an idea of king, and they're not the same. So Pilate's idea of king is probably what most of us think about when we hear the word king. Maybe you're listening to a fairy tale or something like that, and king shows up, and you think of a guy in charge, absolute power, if you will. Whatever the king says happens, life, death, whatever it is. Like the king is king. Pontius Pilate might have been thinking about Caesar, as did many of the people of his day. Not too long after this conversation, Pilate says to the crowd, you may remember this, he says to them, "Do you want me to crucify your king?" And they yell back, "We have no king but Caesar." That's what Pilate's thinking about. Jesus, I don't think, is thinking that way. Now, there's this line where Jesus says to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." And I suspect, again, for most of us, we hear that, and the very first thing that'll pop into our head is, well, yeah, that makes sense. Jesus doesn't have a kingdom here on earth like Caesar, but his kingdom is not of this world, it's in heaven. That's a reasonable interpretation of that line, but I think there's a lot more to it. Because that phrase, "not of this world," is used other times in the Bible, and it's used differently. Jesus uses it one time when he's praying about the disciples. He's praying, asking that the disciples be in the world, that is, live in the world, but not be of the world. And Paul makes a very similar use of that phrase in the same way. He charges the people he's writing to be in the world, but not of the world. So just as an example, Christmas is Advent, Christmas is coming up. You and I are we're going to be in the world. We're going to celebrate Christmas just like, our unbelieving neighbors. But that doesn't mean we have to be of the world. That doesn't mean that we have to celebrate it in the same way that they do. You and I can find other ways to celebrate this, more meaningful ways, more spiritual ways to celebrate this. We can be different, if you will. And so I'm wondering if what's going on here is that Jesus is saying to Pilate, look, I understand what you think a king is, but that's not what I am. I am in this world, but I am not of this world. My kingship is not of this world. It does not have the same values, the same concept as you do. For example, it would have been a terrific thing, I think, for Jesus to have said to Pilate in that moment. He could have pointed out to Pilate, Caesar and King Caesar, they've got armies, and it is expected that their subjects die for them. A king decides he wants to go to war, and so he just decides, we'll go to war. And he sends out his subjects, his citizens. He sends them out to battle, and they are expected to die for king and country, right? King and kingdom. That's the expectation. That's just what it is. But what is Jesus' kingdom like? Jesus as a king could have said to Pilate, that's what it is for Caesar, but my king, my kingdom, I die for my subjects. could have pointed out to Pilate, kings have servants. That's what kings do, right? You sit there and everybody does whatever it is you need them to do. They do things even you don't need to do. You just have them do stuff. That's what kings do. But Jesus could have told Pilate, less than 24 hours before that conversation, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. This king, is a servant to his subjects. And even law. When earthly kings make laws, I suppose there are some exceptions to this, but I would suggest that the vast majority of laws the kings have ever made have benefited the king. That was the main reason to make the law. I want to benefit myself, my kingdom. And even if it was a benevolent king and it was going to help the people, I suspect it also was going to help the king too. Hard to imagine a king, offering a decree that wasn't going to be useful for him and his kingship. What does Jesus do? Jesus gives us law, gives us rules, but all those laws and rules are benefiting us. How to live, all those commandments, all those things that tell us how to live a great life. Those rules are for us. They're not for Jesus. It's such a different view of kingship. It is, I'm sure Pilate, even if Jesus had tried to explain it to him, I doubt Pilate would have gotten it. It just, Pilate is thinking one way. He's got absolutely no reason to think in any other way. And basically Jesus is just trying to, no, you got this all backwards. I don't know that Pilate gets his head around that. I don't even know that we get our heads around that sometimes. But it's worth our giving this a lot of thought. Because if you want to know why this matters to us, all you got to do is remind yourself that, I'm a disciple of this king. And Jesus tells us we need to be like him, which means that we too need to go about things differently than perhaps we might normally just naturally assume. Especially those who, as the expression goes, want to get into the public square. You want to take your Christian values and you want to bring them into the public square, or you want it to be part of the debate, if you will, in government and things like that. We need to remind ourselves that our king is not Caesar, not Caesar-like. Our king is Jesus, and we need to figure out a way. How do I walk into the public square? How do I do that and be a servant to others? How do I walk into the public square and, if you will, die to myself so that others might have the benefit of that? How do I walk into the public square and say, we're after, trying to make laws, but I want to make laws that benefit other people, not necessarily me? And I would appreciate this, you think about this, you'll realize that nobody in the public square thinks like this. What do? You walk into the public square and what's your goal? I want to win. That's it. That's my goal. I want to win. I want to get my legislation agenda, whatever it happens to be, I want to get that through. That's all it's about. And I'll do it any way I can. And if you think about it, that mentality, that's Caesar. We don't worship Caesar. We are not sons and daughters of Caesar. We are not disciples of Caesar. We are disciples of Jesus. We are disciples of a king who serves us, who gives us laws that benefit us, and a king who dies for us. And we need to act in that same way. I challenge you to think about this. It's not an easy topic, but the more you dig into it, the more perhaps you'll struggle with some of the things that you read and listen to and hear and even do yourself. And that's all we want. That's what we need. We need to struggle with this because, like everything else, Jesus is right. And we need to be subjects of Jesus, that king, that kind of king, a king that will die for us.